There to Genesis chapter 30. We're continuing our study about the beginning of Israel. Last few gatherings we have talked about the wives of Jacob, who is going to be named Israel. We've talked about those wives and the naming of the children to talk about their spiritual journey. Beginning now, we get back to the story of Jacob. Remember where he is. He is over in his uncle's territory, his uncle's land. He has stayed there to work for his wives. He's continued to work for a while, but now he realizes he needs to get up and he needs to go back home. At least that's his hope, is to be able to go back home. When Laban finds out that he wants him to stay a little while longer. So this is what it says in verse 25 of Genesis 30. Now it came about when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives' children for whom I have served you, and let me depart. For you yourself know my service which I have rendered you." You need to underline this next phrase. But Laban said to him, "If now it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account." And he continued, "Name me your wages, and I will give it." But he said to him, "You yourself know how I have served you, and how your cattle have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased to a multitude, and the Lord hath blessed you wherever I turn. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?" So he said, "What shall I give you?" And Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this one thing for me, I will again pasture and keep your flock. Let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black one among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and such shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later. When you come concerning my wages, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, will be considered stolen." And Laban said, "Good, let it be according to your word." So he removed on that day the striped and spotted male goats, and of all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees, and peeled white strips in them, and exposing the white which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face towards and the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Moreover, it came about whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, that Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flock in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. So the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks and female and male servants and camels and donkeys. Go down to verse 6 of chapter 31. This is him talking to his wives, Jacob. "And you know that I have served your father with all my strength. Yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me. If he spoke thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth speckled. And if he spoke thus, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flocks brought forth striped. Thus God has taken away your father's livestock and given them to me. And it came about at the time when the flock were mating, that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats which were mating were striped and speckled and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, Here I am. And he said, lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled. For I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. Underline this phrase. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. I know it's a long passage, but we have to get it in order to get the story. The first thing I want you to notice about this story is that you're introduced in more detail to this kind of uncomfortable character named Laban. Laban was Jacob's uncle, and we know that Laban had already carried on some kind of deceptions there when he was supposed to give Rachel, and he gives Leah only to get Jacob to work another 7 years for him. But you come to find out some more things about Laban. I had you to underline that whenever we went through that passage about Laban and his relationship with God. This is where Laban was. Laban was a man who had a relationship with God. On different occasions, God speaks to him. He discerns the will and the way of God. One of those times is in that verse 27 of chapter 30 when he said, if it pleases you, stay with me. I have divined that the Lord has blessed me on your account. So he recognizes that God is a God. But the problem with Laban is that he is superstitious and pluralistic. What do I mean by that? He's superstitious to the point that he believes in other false gods and idols. And he's pluralistic because on one side, he wants to believe in God, Jehovah, the real God, the true God. And then he gets over here and he struggles because he wants to pick up and believe other things about other gods. Whenever you read on in chapter 31, you find out that whenever Rachel and Jacob and all them leave, Rachel steals his household gods, his little idols. She steals them and takes them with her. Whenever Laban runs them down and stops the caravan, he's concerned about them leaving in secrecy, but his number one concern is, why did you steal my gods? Why did you steal my gods? What it tells you is this. He was a man who had a relationship with God, but he didn't understand, so he had superstition and false god are pluralistic, and therefore his life is never changed as far as what you see. He never has a change in his heart and life. Now, hold on a second. Before we're just talking about Laban, you be careful in your life that you're not pluralistic. You be careful in your life that you're not superstitious. You be careful in your life that you don't just have God over here. Yeah, I'm trusting in God, I'm trusting in Jesus, and I want to be my Lord and Savior, and I want to go to heaven one day, but also I'm going to read my horoscope, and I'm going to hear what the sun and the stars say to me, and I'm going to read about other religions, and I'm going to see because we're all getting there the same way. You better be careful in regard to that. Now, does that mean you're not saved? No, it just means you're not going to be changed. You're not going to be changed in your life. Whenever you're trying to serve God and you're trying to serve other gods, you need to find out that there's one true God and you need to serve that God. If He's not the real God, don't serve Him. But if He is the real God, serve Him totally and absolutely and put other things aside. When you're trying to adapt and to hold in the pluralistic society and the superstitions of other ages, I'm here to tell you, you're never going to have power of God in your life and you're never going to be transformed. Laban wasn't transformed. Laban wasn't transformed any time in his life. He was always out for number one. Why did he deceive Jacob to start with? He deceived him by giving him the wrong wife that he had worked for. Why? Because he wanted him to work 7 more years. Why? Free labor for him. That was just a deception. It was a lie. Whenever it comes to this aspect of having this agreement with him in regard to saying, I want you to stay and I want you to work with me again. What are the wages that you need? What would you have me pay you? Then they come up with some kind of proposition. And even in that, Laban is deceptive. Laban is deceptive. He does not fulfill exactly what he ought to do. He says, your father cheated me and changed my wages 10 different times. There's all kinds of problems in Laban's life because he's not truly committed to the one true God. But when you're committed to the one true God and you let Him serve Him and you let Him lead your life, He will transform you. He will make you what you ought to be. And if you're not being transformed by Almighty God, then you need to recommit yourself to serve Him. Don't be like Laban. Don't be that person who's out there who's more concerned about his household gods than he is about his family. More concerned about what he's going to get than where he's going to go. More concerned about how he's going to get it than the means whereby he does get it. I'm here to tell you, just don't need to be Laban. And Laban in this story is not pictured as a character that you and I want to be like. The story is ultimately about this, that Jacob realizes that he needs to go home. He needs to break away from Laban, and he needs to provide for his own family and his own life. And he eventually needs to go home. So he tells Laban, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to go. And Laban says, no, I found out this, that because you're here, God has blessed me. And that was true. Because you're here, God has blessed me. Do you know why God blessed him because of Jacob being there? Because of a commitment that Jacob made in his life when he was leaving home and going to Laban's house. You remember that? You remember whenever he had the dream and he laid his head on that rock, and that dream of Jacob's ladder coming up and going down? And when he woke up, do you remember what happened to him there? He made a commitment to God. It's found in chapter 28, verses 21 and 22. It says, and if I return to my father's house safely, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone which I've set up as a pillar will be God's house. And all that thou dost give me, I will surely give a tenth to thee. I talked about it when we went through that, remember? He made a vow. He says, if you'll do this for me, God, I will serve you. You will be my God. And he anointed that pillar and said, and this is going to be the house of God. And my commitment and vow to you is I'm going to give a tenth, which is what's called a tithe. I'm going to give a tenth, or of everything you bless me with, I'm going to give that to you, God. Now, he just found out God's miraculous plan of economy. Do you know God's plan of economy? It's right there. God says that He wants to bless His children in order for His children to give back to Him, whereby His kingdom work can be carried out. The idea of tithing and giving a tenth is not the law. Somebody said, well, that's the law. No, it's way before the law. Abraham tithed before there's ever the law. Jacob is here before Moses and ever the law. Tithing was some practice. It was a response of adoration and of worship to their God. And he made a vow and said, God, remember, he's walking away from his family with nothing. He's got everything he has in a suitcase. He doesn't have anything, but he says, God, whatever you will give to me, whatever you'll provide for me, I will give you a tenth. I will give you a tenth. And whenever he made that commitment, God began to bless him in whatever he did. God just began to bless him. And watch out, even when he's working for Laban, God is blessing him. Whenever he begins to make his own wealth, as he does this, God is blessing. God is watching over. Here's the point. That's God's plan. It was God's plan then. It's God's plan now. And when somebody is willing to make that commitment to God, God will bless, because that's His plan whereby His kingdom is advanced. Let me tell you something about that. Listen, Jacob's not even saved yet. Did you know that? He really hasn't had his heart changed. He doesn't get saved till he wrestles with the angel of God. And he discovers that he's a Jacob and his name's going to be changed to Israel. He hasn't been changed. But even when he hasn't been changed, when he made a commitment to give to whatever God gave him, God blessed him. God blessed him. Why? Because that's God's plan of economy. If some of us could come to understand that, then we'd begin to experience the blessings of God. You'd begin to see miraculous things happen in your life because you're hooked into what God said you have to do. Whenever you do what God tells you to do, God fulfills what He says He will do. And He's always going to give you more than you could ever give. He's going to give you more than you ever expect. And Jacob, even though he is still a Jacob, still an old trickster, still an old deceiver, God is blessing him because of the commitment that he made. I will give as you bless me. Well, what was the proposition that they made? This is what Jacob said. I don't want you to pay me anything, but this is the proposition that I will make. I want to go throughout your flock, the goats and the sheep, and I want to pick out any spotted, any speckled, striped, mottled, any of those that have various colors on them. The black lambs, I want to take those out. Anything that has various colors and is black, I'm going to take those out to be my wages. And that's what I'm going to start with. And then yours will be all the true and pure colors. See, the striped and spotted goats and lambs and the black lambs, they were very rare. They weren't all the time. Most of them were just white. Most of them were solid in colors. It was a rarity to see that. So he says, I'm not going to take the most common ones. I'm going to take the ones that are the most peculiar, the one that's most unique. But I'm going to take those, and then what we'll do is I'll take care of your flock. I'll take care of my flock. And then whenever we meet together, if you ever see one that's supposed to be mine and it's solid color, you know I stole it. But everything that's spotted, striped, mottled, anything that's black, that becomes mine. And all the pure ones, all the white ones, all those of solid color, they will be yours. And that will be the agreement that we make. Laban said, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. I will do it. But you know what Laban does? Listen to what he does. I hope you caught this. Verse 34 says, good, do it according to your word. Notice what 35 said. And he, that's Laban, he removed on that day the striped, spotted male goats and all the speckled and spotted female goats, every one with white in it and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the care of his sons. And they put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's. You know what he did? He said, that's a good deal, but you're not starting with any. I'm taking all the spotted, all the speckled, all the striped. All those that are already that way, you don't start with any of those. It's a good deal, but I'm taking all those, and he takes every one of those that should have been Jacob's, and he gives them to his son, and they get 3 days' journey away, so there's no way that they're going to be able to interbreed with each other. And old Laban's kind of laughing. He's laughing because his idea is, man, he's not going to have many. There's not going to be spotted, very many black. He's agreed to something, but he didn't know that in that agreement that I'm going to pull all those that are already there and pull them away. That's Laban. What's Laban like? For himself. What's Laban like? He's a cheater. He's for himself. What did Jacob do? It didn't bother Jacob. Jacob went on, he says, there in verse 37, you find something really interesting. First of all, it says that he takes the trees and he strips them down, and it shows the white inside of the tree. And he puts those in the watering troughs and all these kind of things. He puts them there whenever they're breeding in order for them, listen, in order for them to have spot and speckled goats and sheep. And then after that, whenever he has a group of spotted, speckled, striped, he puts them out away from everything else. And whenever the sheep or the goats are mating, they're to look at those spotted and speckled sheep so that they'll have spotted and speckled sheep. The third thing he did was, and this was smart on his case, when he found a good strong sheep or a good strong goat, he made sure that that one would mate so that it'd be spotted, be one of his. If it was weak, he gave it to Laban. These two characters are something, aren't they? I mean, they are. It's kind of like, you know, who's going to trick who? Who's going to deceive? Who's going to do the other? But it looks exactly like that Jacob has this great plan whereby he knows how to make sure he's got striped and speckled and spotted sheep and black sheep and all this so that he'll gain it. Let me tell you something. None of that had anything to do with what he was producing. None of that had anything to do with it. I said, man, what was that they stripped back that thing and made them have spotted sheep and speckled sheep? No, it didn't. Not at all. What that was in that particular day, what they believed was this, that whatever a sheep or a goat was looking at, whenever it was mated, that's what it would have. And so if he would put that down there and they'd see the white or see different colors in regard to it, whenever they were mating with those rods there, they're going to have speckled or spotted or striped sheep. And once you had speckled spotted, he put those out there, and he took all the white sheep and made them look at those speckled and spotted ones so that whenever they were getting mated, while they're having speckled and spotted, they're going to have speckled and spotted. That ain't got anything to do with anything. That is not how it works. It didn't matter what a sheep was looking at. It Didn't matter what a sheep's looking at a spotted one, so she's going to have a spotted. That's not true. None of that was true. But that was his plan. That's what they believed. That's what they put together. That's what they thought. So here's his plan of how he's going to work out and get spotted, speckled, and grow his sheep, and grow his herds, and to grow those flocks. He's got his own plan. But remember this, the plans of man are in the mind of man, but God directs his path. You remember that? He has all of this plan, how he's going to work it out. And do you know what happens? He has spotted sheep. He has speckled sheep. He has black sheep. He has spotted goats. He has mottled goats. He's just producing everything. Everything that's good ends up as being Jacob's. Not because of a thing he did. You know why? You know why it happened? Because God did it. And God tells him why he does it. Let me show you something. This ought to excite you about science. If you like science, if you think, and God and science put together, that's why I had you to read chapter 31. It says in verse 7, talking to his wives, Jacob said, "Your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. However, God did not allow him to hurt me." Now listen to what Laban had done. "If he spoke thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flock brought forth speckled. And if he spoke thus, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock would bring forth striped." You hear what Laban had done? The first agreement was any speckled, any striped, any mottled, any black, any of those were going to be Jacob's. But you know what happened? They all started being that way. So he changed the wages. He says, nope, this year it's not going to be that way. You only get the speckled ones. You know what they had that year? Speckled. The next year he said, you're not getting the speckled ones this year. Changing the wages, remember? All you get this year, spotted, striped. Okay? The striped ones. They're all striped that year. In other words, whatever he was saying was going to be the wages, that's exactly what they were having. You know why? Because God was in charge. God's in charge, not man. God is in charge. Listen to how he defines and describes to his wives what God said about how it happened that way. Look at verse number 9. "Thus God has taken away your father's flock and given them to me. It came about at the time when the flocks were mating that I lifted up my eyes and I saw in a dream, and behold, the male goats which were mating were striped, speckled, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, 'Jacob,' and I said, 'Here I am.' And he said, 'Lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats which are mating are striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you.'" Why did he get the flocks? Why were they striped and speckled and mottled and black? Why was it the fact that he was getting? Because God did it. Because God was in charge. He's always been in charge. And you know what he told Jacob? This is what he told. Listen. He said, "Jacob, I want you to open up your eyes. I want you to see something. I want you to look at those lamb or those sheep, and I want you to those goats. I want you to look at them. And I want you to look at the males. And I want to show you something. I want to show you something you can't see. I want you to see that every one of those are striped, speckled, and mottled. Every one of those that are mating, striped, speckled, and mottled. Now, I don't know if you grew up on a farm, but let me educate you a little bit, okay? In regard to that. More than likely, most of the people would think if you have a black cow or a black bull, you're going to have a black calf. That's right, okay? That's good. That's just genetics, all right? You learn that in science in regard to it. If you think that if you have a solid, if you think the male that's mating is solid, and he's going to mate to a solid color, then they're going to always be solid. In regard to sheep, you got a white you got a white male, and you put those together, and it's always going to be white. It's always going to be white, because if one white, another white produces white. But that's not the way it is, right? No, that's not the way it is at all. That's not, because their genetic makeup may be totally different than that. Their genetic makeup may be they may look white, but they're just not all white. And you know what God said? God said, let me show you these sheep. You see those male sheep right there? When Laban sees them and when you see them, they're solid white. And that should mean that everything they produce is solid white. But let me show you how they're really made up. And he lets them see not phenotypically, but genotypically. You know what that means? Phenotypically is what you look like. Genotypically is your genes and how you're made up. And God said, let me show you genotypically let me show you what they look like. And he looks at them and they're not white. They're striped, they're spotted, they're mottled, they got all kinds of colors. And you know what that means? If they're striped and spotted, that they're going to produce striped and spotted. You know what that means? I don't know if this is eye-opening to you. God knows about genetics. Did y'all know that? God understands genetics. Well, He ought to. He created it. What's so funny to me is we're so arrogant in our little bitty brains. Whenever science knows about 1/100 of 1% of all there is to know. Okay? As much science, we don't know anything compared to what God knows, all right? But what's funny to me is whenever science comes along, it's like science has discovered something that God didn't know. Let me tell you how it works. God knows it all. He created it all. He put it all together. He's not surprised by anything. And all science does is help us to understand a little bit about what He already knows. You understand that? So I'm going to hold on to God rather than science. Science is just helping me understand how great a God that I serve. Here in the book of Genesis, He is saying to Jacob, let me show you something that man will not discover till the 20th century. They're not going to discover it in the 20th century. I'm going to show you that the makeup of an animal has to do with genetics, not just what it looks like. And it was in the 20th century that we finally came to understand that. How many of you remember the Punnett square? You remember a Punnett square? You know what that is? This means yes, this means no. You all know what it was if you did science at all. A Punnett square was the fact that you took the genotypes of offspring and to find out what it was going to be. You remember that? You'd have a red and a yellow and the red, and they're going to cross over, and whether you had dominant traits or recessive traits. Y'all remember that? Did y'all take science? Y'all remember that? Okay. Well, in regard to those things, you have dominant traits and recessive traits. The dominant trait is usually what's going to work out if it's both dominant. Dominant's going to usually work out recessive. But wait a minute. If you have a recessive trait and another recessive trait, then that which is not what's seen maybe what's going to happen. That's genetics. All of that was genetics. And we got amazed at that. Because we knew that whenever you put this together and there was that genotype, that it more likely is going to be look like this or look like that. God already knew every bit of that. And God told to Jacob, said, let me show you what those sheep really look like. Let me show you what they really look like. That's what they really look like in the makeup. And so whenever they bred, they have striped and mottled, and they have speckled, they have everything, because that's what they're really like, not what you see on the outside. Because inside of them, there were all kinds of genes and traits that made them what they were. Made them who they were. See, you can always know if something is called homozygous, it means it's always going to be that way. If you have a bull that's black and he's homozygous, he's always going to have black calves. But if he's heterozygous, that means you have a black or you have some other color. And he said, those are heterozygous sheep. You won't know what that is till the 20th century, Jacob. But those are heterozygous sheep, and they're going to produce things you can't believe. There's no explanation looking on the outside. The explanation is on the inside where they are. And what happened? They had those sheep. And why did the sheep come speckled or striped? Not because of that rod. Not because they were looking at speckled sheep whenever they made it. Not for any reason. The reason it happened is because God made them that way. And you know what God told Jacob? Whenever you're dealing with Laban, listen, you bargain for the speckled, striped, and the black ones. Because that's what's going to come. Laban's not going to let you have those pure ones. He'll let you have the ones that are rare. And he's going to do all these things to try to keep you from having. He's going to pull all those speckled out, and he thinks he's got a pure breed. He doesn't know anything. I know what they look like. Here, Jacob, that's what they look like. Right there. And you're going to be fine. And he was. You know what happened? Everything that came was speckled and mottled. If it was strong, it was always good. It was always Jacob. And his herds and his flocks get bigger and bigger, and Laban's get smaller. Why? Because that's God's plan of economy. You heard what he said right there in chapter 31, where he's talking about Laban is doing this to you. Verse 13, I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar, where you made a vow to me. Now arise, leave this land, and return to the land of your birth. Why has this happened to me? God, why have you been good to me? Because you made a covenant with me. You made a vow to me. You said that I would be your God. You said that you would give a tenth of everything I blessed you with, and I'm pouring out those blessings. I'm giving you those blessings so that you can bless my kingdom, so that the work of the kingdom can be advanced. That's what I'm doing. Now, you have your little feeble plan, and you think you're doing it, and you think that you have this plan whereby you get it, but that doesn't have anything to do with it. Your plan's not the reason that you're going to be blessed. The reason you're going to be blessed is because I already know everything, and I told you what to do. And I'm in charge of everything. If I want a spotted sheep, I have a spotted sheep. If I want a striped goat, I have a striped goat. Because I am God. And the best thing you've done is to have a relationship with me. A relationship with me. Let me tell you something. The best thing we do is have a relationship with that kind of God. Amen? Because we might not be in the sheep business, and we might not be in the goat business, but let me tell you what, we are in the business. We're in the business of making a living. We're in the business of making money. We're in the business of living life. And I don't know about you, but I like a God who already knows what's going to happen down the road. I like a God who knows where I need to be and what I need to be doing in order to be in that place of blessing. I like to know that the God who is not controlled by science, but He made everything that science is trying to understand, that He's in charge of what I'm doing. Now, He may not always think my plan is best, because my plan isn't always best. I'm about like Jacob. Sometimes I'm over here doing things that really don't matter. But the point of it is, if I'm committed to Him and I've made an agreement with Him and I've made a vow to Him and I live that vow, He's still going to bless me even though I don't always understand. And even though I don't always do it right, He is going to bless me. Now, this story gives us two distinct people. Laban, who has a relationship with God but superstitious and pluralistic, and he's out for himself, and he cheats and changes and steals and everything else he can. And you see things decrease in his life. The only reason he had any blessing in his life because he's in the right relationship with God through Jacob. Then you see Jacob over here, who's not always right, not always good, but he's made a commitment to God that you'll be my God. And I'll give to you, God, what I've promised. I will give to you. And God says, through that one, I can bless the world. Through that one, I can make a difference. Now, who are you going to be like? Are you going to be like Laban? Or are you going to be like Jacob? Are you going to walk in your life in superstitions and trying to find other gods? Or are you going to serve the one true God? You're going to believe that true God, make a commitment to that God, to just like He said. God, you bless me, I promise you, I will give to you. You bless me, I will bless the kingdom. You bless me, Lord, and I'll be faithful to do what I have promised to do. And back up and watch God do what He does. Doesn't matter what your plan is. What matters is the God that you serve. You be about your business and let the God you serve, the God who promises, bless you. That's what I want to experience in my life. What about you? You want to experience that in your life? Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for the truth of your word. I thank you that, boy, you just opened to us the word of God and help us to understand things that we wouldn't have understood for centuries later. But it's so matter of fact in the word. It's just like, let me show you what's really going on here. Let me show you how things are put together. I want to encourage you to walk with me, a God who knows that. Boy, I don't think Jacob was ever the same. Whenever he saw that, when he watched God do what only God could do, deep sense of his heart, I think he knew it wasn't his plan, it was God's work that made all the difference. And it's a fun time to be living under God's plan, doing God's work, fulfilling your promises to the Lord and watching Him work and move and fulfill things you never thought He could do. That's a great experience. It's far more fun than over here trying to decide what part of your life you want to give to God and what part you're going to hold, what you're going to believe God for and what you're going to believe other gods and other things for. One life is transformed, the other life is unchanged. One life becomes a blessing, the other life is always taking. Who do you want to be like? I hope and pray you'd want to be like a Jacob. All there's things wrong in his life, he's still got to get things right. But he at least has a right relationship with his God, his possessions, and keeps his vow.